Last week we ended off. We're just now starting the very top of Ches Amid Beis in the Gemara. We had started to discuss the opinion of Rabban Gamliel, who says that you have until dawn to recite the evening Kriya Shema. We didn't have any kind of resolution as to what Rabban Gamliel's opinion was regarding the earliest time to recite the morning Kriya Shema. But if indeed he holds that you could recite the morning Kriya Shema from dawn onwards, you could end up with a situation where you would just recite Shema 2 times back to back and fulfill the evening and then the morning. Okay, now the Gemara goes back to a quote from the Mishnah, Piska. Remember that word in the Yerushalmi means going back to a quote from the Mishnah. Maaseh shebou banav mi beis hamishta. There was once a story where Rabbi Gamliel's sons came home late from a party. And he said to them, if you haven't yet recited Kriya Shema, even though it was well after Chatzos, even though it was well after midnight, he said you still should recite Kriya Shema. So that sort of indicates that, let's see what the language is. He says, Amru, Im lo ala amud hashachar chayav atem likros, lo zu bilvad amru ela kol shamru chachamim ad chatzos mitzvason ad sheyale amud hashachar. And he even went as far as to say that even the chachamim who said until chatzos, you still have until morning. Now, the Gemara's assumption in the Yerushalmi is very different from that of the Bavli. In the Bavli, the Gemara seems to say that you can reconcile the two opinions, that even the Chachamim would agree that the time limit until Chatzos is a lechatchila, but b'di'evet, if you miss the Chatzos deadline, you still have technically until dawn to recite Kriya Shema, because the entire night is considered to be b'shoch b'cha, when you lie down. But that's not the assumption of the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi actually assumes that there's a bona fide machlokas here between Rabbi Gamliel and the Chachamim. And the Chachamim, when they say chatzos, means that after midnight, it's, like we say, for fallen, can't do it anymore. And Rabbi Gamliel says, no, you can still do it. So the Gemara now raises a very interesting question, which is, the Rabbi Gamliel, holigal rabbanan, Va'avad uvda kivasei, you mean to tell me that Rabbi Gamliel not only disagreed with the Chachamim, but actually paskin the halacha, practically speaking, against the Chachamim? In other words, it's one thing to say that your opinion differs, but as a matter of public policy, should we not always get consensus and go according to the majority? Even when I personally disagree, should there not be a public policy that creates uniformity? And now the Gemara is going to give us 3 examples of great Tanoim who personally disagreed with the other Chachamim, but nevertheless, when it came to practical halacha, always went along with the majority. Let's see the 3 examples. V'ha Rabbi Meir holagal rabbanan v'lo avad uvda kavase. I'll give you one example of Rabbi Meir who disagreed with the Chachamim, but never would take the law into his own hands to paskin like himself, but rather went like the Chacham. And Rabbi Akiva polig al Rabbi, v'ha Rabbi Akiva polig al Rabbanan, v'lo avad uvda kavase. And Rabbi Akiva was the same. And thirdly, v'ha Rabbi Shimon polig al Rabbanan, v'lo avad uvda kavase. And Rabbi Shimon also, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, when he disagreed with the Chachamim, even though he stated his opinion, but nevertheless, when it came to practical halacha, never acted upon his dissent.
These are big guys.
These are big guys. So now, before we go any further, the Gemara is going to tell us what were the 3 cases. V'ha ashkachnan de Rabbi Meir polag al rabbanan v'lo avad uvda kavase. What's the case? The Tane, what's the case of Rabbi Meir? There's a discussion in the laws of Shabbos, Sachin al Vantis lechoyle b'Shabbos, that it is permissible to anoint or to place upon a sick person a salve that's called alvantis. Now, what is the salve of alvantis made of? So the note says that it's made out of oil, wine, persimmon oil, and water. Okay, I don't know what it's for, but you're allowed to place it upon a person's skin on Shabbos. Probably it's a liquid, and you're allowed to do it on Shabbos,
It's healing.
even though it's a healing salve. But apparently, so there could be two reasons why this healing salve would be permitted. We know that in general, the Chachamim made a rule that you're not supposed to prepare an elixir and use it on Shabbos because of something called shechika samamonim, that you may come to grind up herbs on Shabbos, which could constitute a malacha. So therefore, even if you have a prepared elixir, a medicinal elixir on Shabbos, you're not supposed to take it on Shabbos, lest you come to grind up the raw ingredients on Shabbos itself. So now there are limits to this halacha, and I want to be very clear, especially because we have a physician in the room. I want to be very clear to the limits of this halacha. There are many exceptions to this rule. There are probably more exceptions than there are to the rule than the rule itself. Generally speaking, this halacha only applies to someone who is only mildly ill, and he would like to take either something that is either prophylactic, preventative, or he wants to take something for a mild discomfort. So that's when this gezerah kicks in. But if a person is experiencing true discomfort, or is sick in the conventional sense of the word, the poskim generally say that this does not apply. So on a practical basis, where would we apply this halacha? If someone was to ask us, I want to take food supplements like vitamins and other things like that on Shabbos, we would recommend that they abstain on Shabbos from taking optional food supplements because of this gezerah. But if they're sick and they need to take either an antibiotic, or if they have a splitting headache and they need to take an aspirin or a Tylenol or whatever, or or anything like that, so then this gezerah does not apply on a practical halachic basis.
I thought if you take vitamins every day, then so you can take a Shabbos too.
I'm sure there are poskim who would be permissive of that, but it all depends on how vital you view this vitamin. It could be that if a person really clinically is suffering from a vitamin deficiency, then he would be permitted to take even vitamins on Shabbos. But let's say you want to take something that hasn't been clinically demonstrated, right? You want to take echinacea, or you want to take, I don't know, what's some of the other food supplements, ginseng, or things like that, where the efficacy is not even agreed upon. So then if it's in pill form, we would advise a person against it. Now, there's another dispensation to this halacha, and that is that let's say it's a type of item that even healthy people take, not for illness purposes, but let's say they just take it because they like the flavor. So even though some people take it as a medicinal ingredient, but other people use it as a food item, so then there's no restriction either. So for example, if there's a certain kind of Chinese herbal tea, and some people drink it, for its medicinal effects, and other people drink it because they like the flavor, or they like to drink it as as an aftertaste. So then in that case, there's also no prohibition because it's not clearly indicated that it's being used for medicinal purposes. Okay, so like I said, the application of the prohibition of taking medicine on Shabbos probably has more exceptions than it has rules. But in general, this is the thing. So what this brisa is now introducing to us is that there's this elixir called alvantis that we permit a person to use as a salve on Shabbos. And the reason is either because healthy people use it just to as a skin moisturizer, or it could be because this person is genuinely ill who needs to take it. There's a dispute as far as why it's permissible. But Emasai, Bisman Sheturafo Biyayin B'Shemen Me'erev Shabbos. But they only permit this Alvantis elixir if it was prepared from the day before, and you mix together the olive oil and the wine from before Shabbos. Aval imlo tirafa me'erev Shabbos asur. But if you didn't prepare it from before, then preparing it on Shabbos, even according to the permissive opinion, is not okay. And again, we're concerned that if we allow you to do that on Shabbos, you may come to grind up other spices which would constitute a malach. Now, Tane, and then the Brisa continues and it says, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Mater haya Rabbi Meir litrof yayin b'shemen b'lasuch lechola b'Shabbos. That Rabbi Meir was even more permissive, and he said this alvantis, you're allowed to even prepare it on Shabbos and to provide it for a sick person. Uchevar chala uvikashnu lasos lokein. And Rabbi Shimon testifies that once Rabbi Meir got ill, he was seriously ill, so we wanted to prepare him this alvantis elixir. And we said, Rebbe, we want to prepare an alvantis. We know that you've been quoted as saying that you permit even the preparation of it on Shabbos. And he said, no, I don't permit it. So, velohini achlanu, and he wouldn't let us prepare it. So, ve'amarnu lo, Rebbe devarecha mevatel b'chayecha. So they said, Rebbe, are you going to nullify your own words during your lifetime? In other words, why would you retract what you've already established as what your psak halacha? Ba'amar lan, hafal pi shani mekel la'acherim, machmir ani al atzmi, dahapligi alai chavrai. And Rabbi Meir says, I'm prepared to be lenient for others, but for myself, I feel that I have to be stringent because my colleagues disagree with me, which is a very interesting statement, meaning that Rabbi Meir felt that as a public policy, he needed to be machmir. He needed to demonstrate that he was going along with the rest of the group. And it could be that he was only lenient privately when he felt that someone was suffering. He felt, he could take a liberty and tell the person, go ahead, you can prepare the alvantis, go ahead, it's not a problem. But from a public policy point of view, when it came to him actually using it for himself, where it would be more of a public sort of demonstration, he said, no, I have to go and abide by what my colleagues say. So I'm prepared to suffer, not to take this salve on Shabbos, because I got to go along with what the rest of the chevra says. So this is, a demonstration of what the Gemara says, that really the challenge is on Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel, according to this, really should have, when it came to his own family, he should have told his sons, you know what, even though according to me, you can say Kriya Shema, but according to my colleagues, it's already too late, sons. And he should have said, you can't do it anymore. So that's the question that the Gemara is asking. Why was Rabbi Gamliel prepared to allow his sons to recite Kriya Shema? Well, let's go on to the next case. We said that Rabbi Akiva, another big gun, also was prepared to retract his opinion for the sake of abiding by the majority. V'ha'ash kachnan de Rabbi Akiva poligal rabbanin v'lo avad uvda kavase. Right? Rabbi Akiva also did the same thing. De taninan taman, or kaye de taninan taman, like we have a Mishnah in Masechet Ohalot, which talks all about the laws of Tumah and Tahara. Now, in order to understand this, we have to appreciate that there are multiple methods by which a person can contract Tumah by coming in the proximity of a corpse. When you touch even a small part of bodily remains, you become Tameh. But there's another way to become Tameh, which is called Tumas Ohel, and hence the name of the tractate Ohalot. What does an Ohel mean? An enclosure, a tent, a tent literally. And what the Torah basically says, Adam ki amus ba'ohel, if a person dies in a tent and his corpse is lying in a tent, then anyone who enters into the tent will become tameh. But our rabbis have a tradition, which is discussed extensively in Tractate Ohalos, that you need to have a certain minimal amount of bodily material, of bodily remains in that tent in order for the people that are in that tent to become tameh. Let's say you only have a portion of a corpse, but you don't have the entire corpse. So then it all depends on whether you have major limbs and organs of the original corpse. But if you only have a small portion of the original corpse, then entering the tent will not render you tameh. Okay? So just obviously, as you know, these halachos do not apply largely today because we don't practice the laws of Tum and Tara, but they do have applications even today. To whom? Kohanim. A Kohen has to know these halachos because if a Kohen, let's say, goes into a place where there are bodily remains, he has to know whether or not it's permissible for him to come in. This would not have that many practical applications as far as remnants of body parts, but you never know. It could.
Do you rectify that by going to the mikveh?
No, you can only rectify it with the ashes of the para aduma, the red heifer.
No?
For you.
No. Can't be rectified. There's absolutely no benefit of going to mikveh to rectify tumas mace. It doesn't work. It's like getting inoculated with sugar water. It doesn't do anything. A mikveh alleviates tumas keri when a person has ejaculate that's come out of his body. So then going to the mikveh purifies him from that. But the higher level of tumah, of coming in contact with the dead, the mikveh doesn't have any effect. So there's an assumption that all people are tameh today, because invariably all people have come in contact with the dead. So you might say, well, if that's the case, if the Kohen, if Korotkin's already tameh, then what's the big deal if he just goes to the cemetery again? And so we learn from the halacha that even a tameh Kohen is not allowed to expose himself to further tumah. Even though it's already presumed that I'm tameh, and I'm going to have to wait for the para aduma if I ever want to have anything to do with the Beis Hamikdash. Nonetheless, I'm already over the hill, but nonetheless, already past the age when I'm allowed to serve. But nonetheless, you still can't come in contact with additional tumah. So that's why Kohanim can't go to the cemetery. Kohanim can't, be there when the body is being prepared and so forth. So let's take a look at this halacha. Hashedra v'hagulgoles mishnei mesim. So we know from the Mishnah in Ohalos that you need to have at least the skull and the spine of a body in order for it to transmit to masohel. If you only have the skull and not the spine, the vertebra, or only the vertebra and not the skull, that will not transmit tumah in an ohel. The case that the Mishnah deals with is what if you have the skull from one body and the vertebra from another body? So does that transmit tumas ohel or not? So, orevius dam mishnei mesim. Another thing that will transmit tumah in an ohel is if you have a minimus of 1/4 of a log, which is about maybe 4 ounces of blood from the corpse, that also will transmit tumah in an ohel. But what if you have half a revius from one corpse and half of a revius of another corpse? Or verova atzamos mishnei mesim. Also, if you have a certain amount of bone, you need a 1/4 of a kav of bones, intact bones from one corpse in order that it will transmit tumas ohel. Well, what if I have half a kav, half of that amount from one corpse, and half of that amount from another corpse. So, or aver min hames mishnei mason. Or let's say I have a full limb, like a finger. That would considered to be a full limb, but it's normally that would transmit the tumas ohel. But let's say I have half of a finger from one corpse and the other half of a finger from another corpse. Or aver min hachai mishnei anashim. And this is true even if it's aver min hachai. I mean, let's say the person is still alive, but his a limb of his gets cut off. So we know that that too will transmit tumas ohel, will render people tameh. But let's say half of a limb from a living person is from one person, and the other half is from another person. It's pretty violent out there. Okay. So Rabbi Akiva mitame, v'chachamim mitaharin. So Rabbi Akiva says, even if it's a combination of two separate people, if it's the requisite amount, it transmits tumas ohel. And the Chachamim disagree and they say, no, it can only transmit tumas ohel if it comes from one person. So Tani, but then the Brisa continues and it says, Ma'aser shehiviu kupa maleya atzamos mikfar tavi, v'hinichuha ba'avir hakneset belod. There was once a case, and don't ask me to explain what the circumstances were, but there was a box that was filled with bones from dead people from a village called Tavi. And they didn't want anyone to become tameh through exposure to it. So they brought it to a gathering place that only had walls but no ceiling in the town of Lod, where the airport is. Just imagine like an airport hangar with no roof. Okay, so they brought it to the Lod area. And so because by doing this, people would not become tameh if they came into the building. Because one of the requirements of becoming tameh when you come into the building is that it has to have a covering on top in order to contain all the tumah, so to speak. V'nichnas todros harofe, v'nichnasu kol harof mima. So Todros was the name of a famous physician, a famous ancient physician that was well known in the times of the Gemara. And he came in together with a whole bunch of other physicians. And these were Jewish physicians, part of the rabbinic community. And they wanted to check the bones to see, are there any skeletal remains from one individual? Okay. Amar Todros Harofe, Ein Kan Shedra Mimes Echad Velo Gulgoles Mimes Echad. And Todros said, there is neither a vertebra from one person, nor is there a skull from one person. In other words, he said, I've looked at the pieces, I've looked at all of the skeletal remains, and through my medical expertise and my forensic knowledge, I can conclusively say that these are not from the same person. Okay? So that's what he was able to determine. And because of that, so Amru hol v'yeshkan hamitaharin v'yeshkan hamitamin namod al haminyan. And so the Chachamim said, well, let's see. Now that we know that there's no skeletal remains enough from one person, but there are from multiple bodies, let's determine halachically how we should view this box of bones. Do we view it as transmitting tumor or not? Do we have to continue making sure that people stay away from this? Or can we tell people that it's okay and we'll bring it to somebody's house? So they basically said, we better take a vote because all the rabbis were present. Let's take a vote and see what everybody holds. So, the Hischilu me Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was the one who had said that it's tameh. That he said, Rabbi Akiva had been previously quoted as saying that it's tamim. But out of respect to Rebbe Akiva, they wanted to get his opinion and to see, who is going to, are the Chachamim going to still say that it's tahor, or will anyone turn over to be machmir like Rebbe Akiva? So they said, Rebbe Akiva, what do you hold? Apparently he was the most respected sage. So Vitir, and he said, I hold it's okay. Totally contradicting what he had been quoted as to before. So Amrulo, so they said to him with surprise, Hol v'hayita mitame, he says, Rebbe Akiva, we know from your previous teachings that you hold that if the skull and the vertebra are from two different people, then you hold that it's still tame. Why are you changing your mind? V'tiharta, and now you are declaring it to be tahor. Well, then obviously everyone will agree with you, and they're going to say tahor, because the whole reason for taking this poll was to see. We thought you were going to say tameh, and then we just wanted to make sure that everyone else still disagree with you. But now that you yourself are saying tahor, there's no reason for us to continue this poll. Then obviously everyone else is going to hold that it's tahor. So you see from this story as well. So that's the Gemara's conclusion. It says, "V'ha'ashkechan de Rabbi Shimon polig al Rabbanan v'lo avid uvda kavase." And so that was the second case. Now let's go to the third case. So far we've seen the case of Rebbe Meir changing his position to go along with the majority when it comes to the alvantis, the ointment that he said is okay on Shabbos, even to prepare, but he wouldn't allow it for himself. We now have the case of Rebbe Akiva, which is ironically the opposite situation, where Rebbe Akiva was more machmir than his colleagues, but he went even to be more lenient because he wanted to abide by the majority rule. And now we go to the third case. V'ha ashkachnan de Rabbi Shimon polig al Rabbanin v'lo avid uvda kavase. Look at his case, where he originally dissented from the Chachamim, but he was not prepared to paskin that way personally. Kayeh de Taninan Taman, as we have a Mishnah in Masechet Shvi'it, which deals with the laws of Shemitah. It says, Rabbi Shimon Omer kol hasefachim mutarim. Now, the word sefiach or sefach, which is the way that the Yerushalmi refers it, is growth that grows on its own. A safiach is something, which is a biblical word. It's something that grows on its own from the ground. The Torah says, Eit safiach hasadeh, if you have safichim, you're allowed to eat them without any restrictions during the Shemitah year, because it grew on its own. You didn't do anything to cultivate it. So those are going to be perfectly fine. So kol ha-sefachim mutarim, as long as they grew, as we'll learn later on, as long as they grew during the 6th year and they were harvested during the Shemitah year, and since they were not planted by anyone and they grew on their own, then even if they started to grow right before the Shemitah year, there's no restriction on using them whatsoever. Chutz misafiche kruv she'ein kayotze bahen biyarkos sadeh. But there's one exception. It's the growth of the kruv. Kruv they usually translate as a cabbage, right? That they are unlike other vegetables that grow from the ground, because the thing about this kruv cabbage is it grows very quickly, and therefore the Chachamim said you should not even use it on Shemitah if it grew on its own during the 6th year, because people looking at it will think that it grew during the 7th year, and people will think that if it grew during the 7th year, then you can harvest vegetables that grew on their own during the 7th year. V'chachamim omrim kol hasefachin asurin, and the Chachamim say that all naturally growing vegetables or growths are going to be forbidden during the Shemitah year. And I think this is not sure whether this is a machlokas on a deoraisa or a derabana. But the bottom line is, Rabbi Shimon is permitted to permit sefichim, and the chachamim are not. And we'll get to the case of where it was a practical halacha, and Rabbi Shimon caved. And even though he was lenient, he said, I'm going to be machmer like the chacham. So we'll deal with that Amir Tzashem tomorrow. Have a great day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You say, we said vertebrae, you said vertebrae.
Vertebrae.